All right. Good morning, everyone. If you have questions or during the presentation, you can definitely put them over in the chat box. My name is Michael Potter. I'm the county extension agent here for horticulture in Montgomery County, up in the Conroe area. We've got a few of our other agents that'll be online as well to kind of help answer questions or kind of poke in when they can. And for the meantime, I hope you can see my presentation. If most of you that are online that are participating, if you could just tell me the city you're at or city where you are. That way I can kind of get an idea of where y'all are all located and what kind of grasses y'all might be growing and some of the different, environmental factors you might be dealing with. So if you could just type in your city there in the chat box and everything, that'll kind of help out as far as what I have to say about this presentation. And I'm going to turn off my camera just to save a little bandwidth since I'm dealing with a little bit older computer. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, spring and summer lawn preparation. There is, a lot going on. We've got a lot of good warm weather ahead of us. The problem is that most people start jumping the gun too early in a lot of things, and a lot of times it is, we kind of get we kind of get envious. The guy next to us has a greener lawn. He's doing things different. He's got to be fertilizing at night. What else could he be doing? The whole thing is we got to look at it from a standpoint that we have warm season turf grasses, whether it be St. Augustine grass, zoysia grass, Bermuda grass, whatever it may be. Typically, once those soil temperatures starting to get in that 75 to 85 degrees, that's when they really physically start growing. So, and the reason why we go to this slide and talk about that is because when grass physically starts growing, that's when it's going to need water. That's when it's going to need fertilization. But we also have to look at soil temperatures as far as weed development and things that occur throughout the year. And we'll get to weed development kind of and some of those things at the end. So it looks like a lot of people have St. Augustine grass so far. So just keep this, that picture in mind. The first thing that we want to do this time of year is really look at look at irrigation audits. We definitely want to start looking at our irrigation, making sure it's ready. There's been a lot of indications that say that we're going to have a drought this year and things like that. So, if that's the case or not, only the weather guys can tell. I'm not a weatherman, but we can always be prepared for it. And the main thing is that when we do any type of irrigation, we want our grass to survive. We want it to basically sustain itself without stress as much as possible. But we also have to take into account that, we don't want to overuse the water because basically that water is used for another purpose. But we want it just basically to persist and survive. And at some point in time, it's going to be thirst or thrive. We do need to, change our view of why we use that water that's out of that faucet. Especially what I'm really referring to is especially the water that's treated. That a lot of the chlorines and additives that are in our drinking water actually inhibit root growth and slow the plants down. You ever wondered why when it rains the grass grows versus when you're watering it? But it's all how we look at it. And by the way, I've got to credit my cohort, Skip Richter. He gave me this photo years ago. This is in Austin, going through droughts, and they can't water, so why not? Let's color it, polka dot it up, and make it look like an art form. So there's all kinds of different types of irrigation devices. Of course, your in-ground sprinkler systems, but your hose draggers, like me, where you can drag them around and move them around the yard. There's also those types of devices as well. An irrigation audit needs to be performed on those just as much as it does on your in-ground sprinkler systems. So you definitely need to go through some inspection, check for leaks, check for spraying in the wrong direction. Heads may be, bent over, they may need to be readjusted. so they're spraying off target. If you're in an area where you have a lot of wind, a lot of times, that's a great indication, especially down in Corpus. Since I was born and raised down there, I know about wind. Can't tell you how many times it kept me from going fishing. Um, but you get, 25, 35 mile an hour wind gusts or something like that, and you get a lot of off-target application. I always kind of make the statement that irrigation systems are designed perfectly on paper. They just don't handle the real world very well as far as, the amount of pressure they might have at a certain time, the spray pattern, the type of heads that are used, those types of things. So during an irrigation audit, you need to make a lot of adjustments and repairs possibly, and also maybe change your scheduling based on this irrigation audit. So list a couple of tools that might be needed. I have a whole bunch of these little rain gauges basically that are, a 1-inch rain gauge. You can buy a set of them on Amazon for, $20 or something like that of 10 of them. Or you can use like tuna or cat food cans that have the low sides on them. Basically some type of measuring device to measure what you're catching. And some of the needed, some of the tools needed for, adjusting those spray heads. Sometimes it's that little screwdriver, sometimes it's a little Allen wrench or something of that nature, maybe even a smaller screwdriver. But just being familiar with those spray heads and things like that will help you. You need a timer. Basically, if you don't have an in-ground system and you're using your just regular spray heads, you would need some type of timer to kind of keep track of how long you're running that system. Calculator to do your calculations, or if you're real good and you like to use Excel, you do it in a spreadsheet. Paper, pencils, some permanent markers, some flags. That way you can mark all of the sprinkler heads when you're first doing it. And also too, this is a great time to get out and map if you have a irrigation system, a below ground irrigation system. It's a great time to map out where all these sprinkler heads are, where your irrigation controller is, where your backflow preventer is, possible, your zone valves and any kind of shut off valves and things of that nature. That way, if you have issues with your irrigation, you know where to shut it off. I can't tell you enough. We have a large facility here in Montgomery County, a demonstration facility, and we have irrigation everywhere. And whenever we have a leak, it is a pain to go figure out how to go turn it off. So finally, I got my crew out here to provide a detailed diagram. And when I know that there's a leak in a certain area, I can go out there when our master gardeners aren't here. I can go out there and shut that system off. So just familiarize yourself with your system. Know how to operate the controller if you have one. If you don't, you'll be doing it just by time alone, and of course the amount of pressure that you put on it. But if you have a regular irrigation system, below ground irrigation system, some other little tools, some pipe cutter, some extra pipe, typically either 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch pipe, sometimes 1 inch pipe for your main, but all different types of little risers and spray heads, and ones that are rotors that spray 360 degrees, or they can be fully adjustable. Sometimes you might get spray heads like in the middle there. The little filter they have in them might get clogged up because there was a repair done and it shot dirt up into that filter, and it clogs it up and changes the spray. So sometimes those need to be cleaned out. When you go into a store, it can be kind of to replace these heads. It can be kind of cumbersome because you have all these different spray patterns and types and companies as well. But you can definitely get a spray nozzle to spray about anything you've got. Even those narrow strips of grass between the street and your sidewalk, they make heads that can do that. And of course, at different lengths. The biggest problem though with some of these heads is that, like the blue one that's in the middle says it's a 10-foot. So it's supposed to have a 10-foot, radius. Well, in your system, if you don't have enough pressure, you might have to use a different head just to make that or accommodate that pressure. This time of year, some people are just now starting to not winterize your sprinkler system, but actually bring it back up into service. Um, and most of the time when we shut those down, we open up the system to evacuate the water. So if it freezes, that ice or that water has somewhere to go. Of course, these should always be, protected and wrapped appropriately, depending on what area you are. Of course, last year, February, we had that huge freeze. No matter where you were in the state, you pretty much, needed to have everything wrapped quite well. But for the most part, bringing them back up online is just a simple quarter turn uh, of the um, of the little valves number 3 and 2, which is the test cock valves. Are just basically a quarter turn or a 90-degree turn to close them up. And that way and then you open up your valves, and then now your system's charged. Um, make sure that you're looking for, your valves, make sure your valves aren't leaking, make sure they're coming on. Sometimes you can do just a quick 1-minute test through the whole system, where it basically runs each station 1 minute. And you can do that. That's kind of a quick way to do it. If you're somebody that keeps up with your system quite well, you run it just a one quick minute through each station, and you'll be able to kind of tell, oh, well, I got a problem here, I got a problem there, or maybe the control valve is not working in an area. Maybe it needs to be replaced and things of that nature. Um, you know, Learn how to operate your systems. I have many people that attend some of my classes here in Montgomery County that wish they'd never had one, um, which is funny because some of them like it to the extent that they can basically go outside, turn it on, and they have found the off button to say, well, I watered this day, I don't need it to water for a while. Um, and that's always a good thing. But there's all kinds of different, basic systems that, just depending on how big your yard is, as far as how many stations you need or how many zones you need. Um, they even have a lot of them now that are Wi-Fi enabled, where you can use an app on your phone to turn them on and off. And even like that one on the bottom right, which is a ratio, we have several of them here at our office. They're kind of neat from the standpoint that they go off of the local weather station. And if it rains or something of that nature, it'll either reduce the watering needed or completely shut off the system so it won't water. And it basically takes kind of it knows, I guess it's got some coefficients and everything in there for different kinds of crops, whether it's turf grass, whether it's landscape or something of that nature, or even vegetable gardens. It'll reduce irrigation if needed. So how you actually do your irrigation audit, like I said, either an above ground irrigation, whether drag your hose type, or a below ground irrigation with pop-ups. Locate your controller, like I said, turn on each station just to kind of give it a once over, see if it is spraying properly. Sometimes you may need to run a little longer if you have heads that are rotating 360 degrees. 1 minute may not give it enough time to operate all the way around, so you'll need to check those and make sure that they are running the way they should. Basically, what I like to do is when I go out, I turn them on and I sit there and I take my flags and I just start marking heads as I go through each station. That way I can identify them. Most of the time what I'll do is if I have several houses that we maintain as a family, and on those irrigation systems, I know exactly how many heads there are in that whole irrigation system. So I have flags basically labeled from 1 to 75, and I can go and hit every pop-up sprayer, whether it be in the landscape or whether it be in the yard, and I've got them all numbered. And why would I do that? Well, because if I see a problem, I can say number 34, it's got, it needs to be replaced, or it needs to be inspected because maybe the filter's clogged up or something of that nature, or station 2 did not come on at all. Then I go look at the controller valve, and that's a great time to really plot out and say, okay, here are all my pop-up sprayers, here are all the sprayers inside the beds, whatever it may be. And you basically can create your own design, unless you have one from the original installer, which in some cases some people do. Most cases we don't. So basically, check for leaks. Maybe, somebody hit it with the mower at the end of the season or during the off season, when you're mowing the leaves or the weeds, and it broke the connection or something of that nature. Then you can take note of that and then make some repairs. Then as far as making adjustments or repairs, some people decide to do it themselves. You'll definitely need a shovel on these underground systems to make some of those repairs. Sometimes, like I said, it's just the connection to the sprinkler head that may need to be changed out or repaired, because sometimes they break. But if you need a licensed irrigating contractor, especially to replace your backflow preventers, which are not cheap, by the way, especially since they're brass, but licensed irrigation contractors, you can look up those at tceqtexas.gov, basically licensed irrigation contractors. There's a list of them there to help you or guide you to somebody in your area that can help you make those adjustments. Sometimes when I don't have time or I'm too busy, instead of me going out there and making those adjustments, or even replacing like a station, the controller box or whatever it may be, I'll just call a licensed irrigator and I'll have them go out there, and the good thing is they're not going to waste much time, because I already have everything documented as far as where they need to go and what they need to fix. But for the most part, I'll also let them do like their kind of irrigation audit to make sure things work properly as well. But the actual physical scheduling, and like I said earlier, this can be done with your below ground or above ground, drag your hose types, any of those. You randomly place your cups out in the station that you're trying to irrigate. You run your station for either 15 or 30 minutes. Take measurements. Let's say you have 10 cups, you should have 10 measurements, and basically you average those out. If you have 10 cups, then you add them all up, divide by 10, and that'll give you your application rate for either 15 or 30 minutes. So it's really an easy way. This is here at our demonstration garden here in Montgomery County. This is a Bermuda patch. You can see I've kind of circled where I've randomly placed those cups out. And in the background, I actually have a separate station right there. So there's actually more cups that are spread out there. I've got about 30 of these little cups that I use. So I go, turn on that sprinkler system, run it for, 30 minutes or whatever it may be. Then I take my measurements, I average everything out, and I can kind of get an idea of how much water I'm applying in 30 minutes, or if I need to go 45 minutes, or if I need to go an hour. This will let you know how much water you're applying. And like I said, it can be done with the hose types too, the fan sprays. You randomly place them out in the area you want to water, and then hey, if I have this thing on full blast, I need to water for X number of minutes to get half an inch of water or a quarter of an inch of water. And that way you can water very specifically for your location and for your type of irrigation system. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. It's one of those things where you can use Excel. Basically, you take your catch cans, average it out. So in this case, zone 4, put in 20 minutes, put out about 3/10 of an inch. So in close to an hour, he's going to put about 9/10. So he needs to split it up into 2 30-minute waterings basically a week to make that 1 inch of watering. So, and that's the key, is that how much water is actually needed, and that amount is 1 inch. So you can kind of see how he did. This guy's an engineer, so he went down. In fact, some of the later spreadsheets he sent me even went down to the actual minute. So a lot of people call me and say, how many minutes do I need to turn on my irrigation for? Well, that is an it depends answer, because like I said, they're created equal on paper, but they don't do well in the real world. Number one, I don't know the pressure that you're at. Number two, I don't know how many spray heads you have in your lawn. I don't know how big your lawn is. So telling somebody, hey, yeah, put them on 12 to 13 minutes, well, that's a range that I could be completely off. And you can see how some of these zones are very different. So it's very important to be exact, or as close as you can to exact on it, doing an irrigation audit, especially trying to figure out how much you're putting out in a period of time. If you're on well water, the main thing is, you may need to have your water tested. Sometimes some wells are really salty or have some issues with their water quality, so have that water tested. The way I see city water, I think city water should be supplemental, basically due to rainfall. And if you look at the rainfall across the state, it's very different. Living in Corpus for as long as I did, basically born and raised, being up there, 25 to 28 inches a year annual rainfall versus up here, we have anywhere from 48 to 52. So, we have a different rain schedule than what, down south does. Does it mean that, what does it mean? Well, sometimes we got to water. And like I said, that water out of that hose might be supplemental. And in different situations too, there's a lot of things that affect your application: trees, shade, wind, your type of soil, the slope, water pressure, fertility rates, their compaction issues, soil temperatures, what's your annual rainfall, all these kind of things, the plant requirement itself. Maybe you have an area that really needs a lot more attention to it. Maybe the soil's a sandy soil, something like that, and what type of equipment you might be using, because that may cause compaction issues. So, percolation or infiltration rates, or organic matter can have a good impact on it. Turf and any kind of ground cover you have on soil will help as far as penetrating or helping water penetrate into the soil. The mulches, of course, in your landscape beds, aeration and everything. If you have really heavy clay soils and you want to do some type of aeration, that helps as far as allowing that water to percolate better. It loosens up that soil. It adds a little bit more oxygen in there. And then sometimes, if you're in real sandy type soils, you may want to go with a compost or some type of top dressing like a sandy loam that'll hold some soil. So you can look at all the infiltration rates there. When you get into a really big clay soil, water goes slowly into the soil, where you can have a real coarse sand, and man, it can absorb water like you wouldn't believe, but the problem is it goes right past the root system. So one of the things I always say is make sure you have a soil test. So the whole thing is that, we've always talked about, we always have issues with rainfall in different parts of the state. We always have drought issues. How much water do you apply? And that's that 1 inch of water. And there are times that less water can be applied depending on how well established your turf grass is. Maybe you're in a situation where it's kind of like a pasture type situation, where you don't have the ability to really water a big area. That grass selection for that would be like, I need more of a Bermuda type grass. Well, if you don't get the rainfall in that area, it's going to go dormant. That's what some of these grasses do. They go dormant, and when rainfall reestablishes, then it comes back. And I saw somebody said need a recommendation for a horse pasture grass in Alvin. I would definitely check with the county extension agent, the agriculture agent in your area, because there might be some other grasses, but a lot of times people, do some type of Bermuda, whether it's like a coastal or Tifton or something like that, but there may be some different recommendations. But definitely call your extension agent in that neck of the woods. You can see here the at 1 inch of water is about 0.62 gallons per square foot. If you equivalent to that, to 1,000 square foot yard, you're putting out about 623 gallons if you have 1 inch of water applied. So, I mean, that's a lot of water. It's even more when you think about it in other terms. Problem is we tend to start watering either too early or we water too late in the season. So cool season versus warm season look to it. We get a lot of influence from the north, unfortunately, with a lot of our products and fertilizers and weed and feeds and all this stuff that we kind of have to take note of and make some adjustments kind of depending on where you are in the state. But for the most part, we're warm season grasses. We're starting right now to get to, I think our temperatures last night, when I woke up this morning, it was like 72 degrees outside. So our turf grasses are going to start growing and start moving here real quick. I would say probably in the next week or two, they're going to start really greening up and growing. So we do have to kind of look at that from a standpoint, how much water are we actually putting out? If you put out too much, what kind of issues do you have? You got, basically you're losing stress resistance to water. You're losing stress resistance to pests or, insect or even fungal or growth or anything like that. So you have to be careful about, putting out too much water. That's a lot of times what we see in our area, just because people don't take into account that they got rainfall, or they just turn on their system and leave it on. So as you move down the scale and you apply less and less water, you get some discoloration, you get some leaf firing, which is, like a dead piece of grass here and there. But then recovery is still, can still happen as far as getting that turf grass back up. But I sit there and I play with numbers sometimes, and I get kind of off of a tangent. And I always tell people, in our area, we get 48 to 50 inches of rainfall a year. And if you look at the actual growing season, okay, well, our growing season up here starts about April 15th and runs all the way to about early to mid-October. So we're looking, 26 weeks or something like that. So if you think an inch a week, that's 26 inches. Wow, we get 48 inches. Why should I water? The biggest thing is that, we do experience droughts occasionally, or prolonged periods where we don't have any rainfall. So those times that, supplemental watering can be done. I typically have only watered my lawn about 3 times a year. And, if you look at, some of these people, especially down south where they have to do year-round watering, or if they do year-round water where they're applying an inch of water every week, you can see how much savings occurs. If you think even about the growing season, my growing season here, I have the potential. I think the norm for a lawn is somewhere around that 3,000 square feet, 2,000 to 3,000 square foot. So you're looking, 46,000, 31,000 gallons of water that could be saved. Sometimes, like I said, it's, thirst or thrive. Sometimes we have to look at it from that standpoint. Would you rather drink it, or would you rather waste it on your lawn? Because not too long ago, we were in severe drought. And especially down in Corpus Christi, when your lake levels were only 23%, those types of things impact what we do. So we really kind of have to take a better approach at how we water our lawns. And here's just kind of a visual picture of, what it takes, 1 inch of water per week looks like versus 3/4 versus ½ inch versus a 1/4 inch. We do want to make sure that lawn is established. We do want to make sure that we have that resistance built into it, so it can sustain itself a little bit more readily. A lot of times people give, most of the turf grasses a bad rap and say, well, it's a water waster. Well, the problem is typically it's the homeowner that's a water waster. So, I've proved that already just by showing you how many times I water a year. But like I said, if you have sand, that's an issue. You may have to water 2 to 3 times a week just to make it sustain itself. Just because that water it filtrates right through and it's not able to stay in the root zone. You may consider, top dressing, every other year with some compost to try to integrate that into the lawn. That way it does have some moisture holding capacity. But definitely, you look at that ½ inch to 3/4 inch a week on a good, well-established lawn, that's perfectly acceptable. So, sometimes we do have to look at it from a standpoint that we just need to turn off irrigation entirely, whether it be the dormant season or maybe we're in a drought. A lot of times if you're in drought restrictions, there's nothing you can do about it. They don't want you to mow. They don't want you to water. So you can't. I know that there's areas up here in our area, in our region, that homeowner associations control when you water. And that, to me, it's perfectly fine, because we get the amount of rain that we need. And your area, it may be different. The biggest thing is that, a lot of times I'm sitting there driving down the road and I see this kind of stuff, water going down the gutters, and stuff like that off into the streams and bays and estuaries, down in Corpus. We've overwatered. The lawn has reached saturation, and what has happened is all of a sudden, since it's already saturated, you apply more water and the water just runs off. When that happens, especially on clay type soils, you need to use a cycle soak type irrigation model. You basically water that lawn, and this is something where you would do it through your irrigation audit. You would water that lawn until you start to see water running off, and you would stop the station. Then you would continue watering the rest of the yard in the same manner and come back later time frame and apply the amount of water that's needed on top of the water you already did. So it's basically letting it rest, letting that water soak in, and coming back and watering again behind it to apply that water that's needed. Good deep watering. There's nothing wrong with a good deep watering. There's research that shows that you should be able to go 7 to 10 days between waterings. In a lot of cases with good established lawns, that'll work. But there's all kinds of, make sure that the proper zone. I had somebody come in recently that they bought the house and the previous homeowner extended the landscape. So plants were getting drowned, of course, but their lawn wasn't getting enough water, or vice versa. So, that's where you have to go back in and, redo that system to eliminate those heads that are in the landscape bed and basically repurpose them back into the lawn or just cut them off totally. A lot of times we water at the wrong time of the year. That bottom picture on the left, that's during the winter time. The only thing that's green is the clover. Just watering is not going to make the grass grow. It's the temperature of the soil. Time of day, early mornings are best. 4 to 6 a.m. Like the exception is always some municipalities and homeowner associations that may dictate those. I've lived down in South Texas where it's constantly humid. I've watered at night when necessary, just to kind of, decrease evaporation and everything else. As long as you don't consecutively do watering at night, week after week, day after day, and you allow that water to dry out, you won't have the issues like rusts and things of that nature. You still could develop it just depending on the moisture rates or humidity rates in your area, but just keep in mind that doing it occasionally is not necessarily a bad thing. It's okay to do it. The fact is, if you do it regularly, that might be an issue. Seasonal watering, days of the week. A lot of people say, well, should I do Monday, Friday? Should I do Monday, Wednesday? Well, it all depends. How well does your soil hold moisture? Clay soils, man, they hold moisture. They hold moisture deep, but they hold moisture. So you just have to apply it in the appropriate way. If you're one of those people that lives on a shallow soil or have a real sandy soil, you do shallow and very frequent waterings, you're not going to have much of a root system. All your root system is going to be in the first couple of inches. A couple of years back, I had a nurseryman come up to me and we had to go do some site visit stuff, and we were going around looking at lawns. And what had happened is our spring was really wet, and it was not cool by any nature, but it was really wet, and we would get rain, and not a big amount of rain. We'd get like a quarter inch every other day, and it was just constant. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. Well, a lot of people said, well, we've had plenty of rain, we don't need to water. Well, what had happened is that as that turf grass was starting to grow in the spring, it was so happy in the first couple of inches of soil that's where all those root systems developed. So it wasn't able to go down and really get water and chase water. That's how you build drought tolerance. So deep, infrequent waterings help grass as far as establishing a good root system. Only water when the turf is growing. Don't do it when it's dormant. Take into account the amount of rainfall you get. Learn where that off button is. Do that irrigation audit, regardless whether it's you're dragging hoses or if you have that below ground irrigation system. Routinely go out and inspect, make sure that your irrigation system is spraying correctly. You can always have something flush through the system that may clog up a little filter or something of that nature, or something may happen. You're mowing and you accidentally hit a sprinkler head and it pops it off, or whatever it may be. But it's okay to go out there and do routine inspections of the irrigation system. Just remember, when you have shady areas, Shady areas require less moisture than in full sun. So reducing the water in those shaded areas is real important. If you apply too much water in the shade, of course, what happens is it just saturates the soil and you get lack of oxygen in that soil. So your plant just kind of slows down even more. So not only is it hurting from the amount of shade, it's now going to hurt because you've applied too much moisture. So just be careful with that. So with shady areas, trim out your trees, thin them out, trim them up so they, reach that kind of higher, elevation where you can allow sunlight to penetrate in the morning and the afternoon, and thin them out so you get more filtered shade through the day. And of course, raise your mower up, a full inch or as high as you possibly can, or even mow every other mowing in those areas just to keep it high enough to where it'll get more sunlight. So we'll talk a little bit about fertilization. A lot of people get so frustrated, they just want to paint it all green. Just this time of year, everybody thinks it's spring, it should already be green. Well, not necessarily yet. We have a lot of lawns that are still damaged from that last February freeze that we had. So they're still trying to come up. One of the other things, especially with St. Augustine lawns, is that St. Augustine lawns every 2 to 3 years will regenerate their root systems. They'll actually put on new roots. So they'll shed roots and then put on new root systems. So sometimes you may just have a bad year just because they're, shedding their root system and they want to come back up. So the whole thing with fertilizers, a lot of people, I had somebody call me earlier this week and they already applied fertilizer and they think they applied too much. And after they told me what they applied, I said, most definitely you did triple the rate. So their grass started to be, it started to kind of go south. It started to look more brown. So they applied too much fertilizer. But the whole thing is when you do that, and typically during the growing season, it's going to grow really fast. So it's going to stress it out. And if you do too little, it's going to do the same thing. But most of the time, if you don't do it at the right time, that's the biggest issue. Because if you've seen fertilizer prices lately, they have almost doubled in most cases. In fact, I had a buddy yesterday call me and said, man, it's $49 a bag for this fertilizer, and I got to buy 2 of them, for his lawn. Of course, he has a big lawn, but yeah, fertilizer prices have gone up. There's ways to reduce that. Number one, to be more efficient, if you have fertilized at the appropriate time and the right rate, according to a soil test, you'll actually be able to utilize all the fertilizer that you put down. So, and that's where we go back to this calendar. And, it's when it's actively growing, not when it's semi-dormant. And like I said, in our area, in the Montgomery County area, and even into Houston, we're looking, about, now to April 15th, that grass is going to start really growing. So this is a good time to apply, fertilization here in the next couple of weeks. And Corpus, you might be a little bit past that or right at it right now. So make sure you have your soil tested about every 2 to 3 years. This will at least give you a baseline to know if your fertilization schedule is working appropriately, meaning that you're doing the right things, because a lot of times we're deficient in certain nutrients. And so doing that soil test will let you know where you stand. You may not need any phosphorus, or you may not need any potassium. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. A good general recommendation by most of our publications in extension have a 3-1-2 ratio. So that's a ratio, 3%, 1%, 2%, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And so you sit there and look at that and go, oh, wow, okay, I can just do that. Well, that may not necessarily be the case for your lawn. I know South Texas lawns down in Corpus Christi area, a lot of the recommendations come back as a 2100 ammonium sulfate. Why is it so different than ours that says a 3-1-2? Well, that one is because high pHs. Some of the pHs down there run 8.2, 8.4, 8.6. Where in my neck of the woods, I've seen 4.8, I've seen 5.2, I've seen 6.8. So I've seen a varying degree. So definitely you have a soil test performed. You can go to that soiltesting.tamu.edu to do that. And that'll give you a baseline of where you need to be as far as your fertilization. And this is what you get back. Like I said, there's a 6.2 right there. Now, on the right-hand side where it says fertilizer recommended, it says 0.9 pounds of nitrogen, 2.2 pounds of phosphorus, and 1.2 1.7 pounds of potassium. So, wow, that's kind of a different ratio than a 3-1-2, isn't it? So you have to look at each lawn individually, because a lot of times when they bring in stuff, or depending on how old your lawn is or your soil, it will change those ratios. In this case, I made some recommendations, because number one, you're never going to find a ratio like that in fertilizers. So you might have to get phosphorus added separately to it, or potassium. So this dictates what you apply. And basically, when you get one of these, a good thing to do is contact your local master gardeners or your county extension agent in your area, and they'll help you as far as getting a fertilization plan in place. Two different types of fertilizer. You have slow release, and you have basically readily available nitrogen type fertilizers. Like I used the example 2100 just a minute ago. It's a application, and you get 2 to 4 weeks out of it, and that's about it. So it gets in the soil quickly, it releases quickly, and it's really it's just a fast shot of nitrates. Problem is, we live in a warm season area, so we have a long 26-week growing season. So better times to use slow release of nitrogen. This also, using slow release type fertilizers, helps with alleviating some of the problems with fungal issues and some of the other stresses that can bring on fungal, drought tolerance issues and insect pressure. So slow release applications tend to be a little bit better. First thing you have to do when you fertilize is find out how many square feet you have as far as lawn space. There's all kinds of calculations. You can do, shape calculations if you want. I just like to do length times width and square off the whole yard and figure it out. There's another way to do it, which uses the area calculator.sodsolutions.com, that link at the top. You can actually type in your address and then basically trace out your lawn, and it'll give you an approximation of how many square feet you have. Basically, I do that for a lot of customers that walk into my office and they start talking fertilizers. I'll basically get their address, pull it up, and I'll say, this is about how many square feet you have, front yard, backyard. So this is what you need. Oh, back to soil tests. A lot of people say, well, should I do 2 tests, front yard, backyard? No, you should do a representative sample of both front yard and backyard. I would hate to have to put out 2 different fertilizer recommendations based on a front yard and a backyard. If you take, 5 or 6 samples from your backyard, 5 or 6 samples from your front yard, mix them all together in a plastic bucket, and then put it into the bag, mail it to the lab. That way it tells you the whole yard, what your application would be. Just a little bit better. And just remember those numbers right there: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK. Those are percentages of product in that bag. So 28% of that 50-pound bag is nitrogen, 5% is phosphate, 12% is potash. Okay, and this one has a little sulfur with it as well. It's just an example. A lot of times I'll just kind of skip through this real quick. We'll use a better example. I like to use the 210, like 2500. So if your application rate comes back and says, hey, you need, I'm gonna go back up here. Basically, let's turn that one up, that's at 9.9 to a 1 pound. 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. If you have a 2500, it takes 4 pounds. It's because it takes 4 pounds of that product out of that bag to make 1 pound of nitrogen. It's kind of a reverse math, but it's kind of easy. So that percentage helps you dictate. So if I take 1 pound of that product out of that bag, then only 0.25, a quarter of a pound, is nitrogen. So it's going to take me 4 pounds to make 1 pound. Sometimes people go, oh, I have been over fertilizing. Oops. So when you do that, that can add issues. Fertilization can be an art form, just depending if you do it right. If you have a drop spreader, make sure you're overlapping, make sure you're crisscrossing and are basically, going the opposite direction. That way you can get good coverage. I mean, you could tell the fertilizer worked, but you can also tell that they didn't apply it very well. So a good crisscross application or cross application where you can get coverage, make sure you line those wheels up, or if you have a broadcast application, make sure you have just a little bit of overlap, not too much. That way you're not triple applying it or double applying it. But definitely go in different directions. A lot of people say, well, what setting do I use? Well, there's an easy way I figured out over the years. Trying to explain to somebody how to do this and apply this out is a big math problem. A lot of people aren't going to try to figure it out. They rather have something they just put in the hopper and go. So basically, if you can figure out that you need, let's say, 10 pounds of actual fertilizer, you take 5 pounds of it and go one direction, and take 5 pounds of it and go the other direction. Now, if you really want to be sophisticated, you get a young kid to do it, and you get them just to keep walking. You put that setting as low as it'll go, and you tell them keep walking until it goes out. So, and that's also a good way to do it. Oops, sorry about the top thing up there. I was supposed to turn that to white and I didn't. So when do we aerify or top dress? A lot of people do some top dressing or even want to add compost. Make sure you're doing something like that when that grass is fully growing. You don't want to do it when it's diseased or it's damaged or unhealthy. You're just going to smother it, especially the top dressing. Half an inch at most if you top dress either with a sandy loam or a compost. That's as much as you would want to do. Anything over that, you'll start to smother the grass and which damage it. So the biggest thing is you have to at least, minimum of 4 weeks for it to regrow before it starts to get a stress. So the stress could be in the middle of summer. The stress could be winter. So, and not only that, we start to kind of in that fall time frame, we kind of start to go south anyway, just because of cold fronts that start to happen in that early October time frame. And so the grass starts to slow down because the soil temperatures come down. So you definitely want to do it when the grass is actively growing. That way it has time to recover or recuperate. And the same thing with aeration. So the biggest thing is that, we tend to do things based on our neighbors. A lot of times when you mow, it should be mowing just to either mow the weeds or mow the leaves, especially during the winter time. Now, of course, we're getting into that time of year. Gas is up. People are, trying to think of new ways to do things. So it's kind of funny. One of the best things that you can do, is sharpen your mower blades. You've probably run over sticks and all kinds of stuff through the winter time, leaves, etc., mowed the weeds. Now's a good time to sharpen those blades. You can definitely tell here the difference between a sharp blade and a dull blade. Dull blades rip the blade, and there's a lot of moisture that's lost due to that ripping of those blades. What height, depending on what type of turf grass you have, you can go all the way up to 4 inches with your St. Augustine. That is a great way to kind of shade out the ground to keep moisture from evaporating from that soil. It also helps as far as building a root system. Some Bermuda grasses like to be mowed a little lower than others. Depends on your type of Bermuda grass that you have. Same thing with zoysia grasses as well. Just remember, don't mow off any more than 1/3 of that leaf blade at one time. If you mow it too short, that's called scalping. That damages the grass. That makes it more susceptible to insect pressure and disease issues. And it just compounds the issue more and more. So, whenever you have that, that grass and it's overgrown or whatever, just take them down a little bit at a time. That way that grass can strengthen or not get stressed out. Mowing the leaves is really acceptable. Mulching mowers are probably even the best, just because all that leaf matter and from either the grass or the weeds or from your leaves, especially in the wintertime and fall, get mulched up and basically can reduce your fertilizer bill. So, the taller the grass, the leaf blades and everything else, especially with St. Augustine, the more root system it has to have in order to sustain that growth. The problem with doing this with like a Bermuda grass is that typically Bermuda grasses like to be mowed lower. In fact, any thin bladed grass likes a lower mowing than what St. Augustine will. If you let it grow too leggy, you get a turf that's very, very loose, not as dense, and it just doesn't look right, or it starts to turn brown. And just remember, dormancy. It's all a part of what we do. Yeah, we have warm season turf grasses, but we do have dormancy that occurs, and it's okay. Greenest to brownest, St. Augustine is going to stay green the longest of all the warm season turf grasses that we can grow. So let's talk about some of the common lawn problems. We talked about watering, we talked about, mowing, fertilization. A lot of times the things that we do impact other things. They increase the incidence of weed pressure, insect pressures, etc. So there's always an underlying cause or something that we're doing or that is going on that causes another problem. We always, especially in extension, we always try to find the cause. What's the real reason why this person's calling me to control this weed or this insect or this type of issue? There's always something. It's kind of like CSI for plants is what I like to say. So weeds, if you don't have any weeds, thank goodness. I've got people that don't have any weeds, but yet they insist upon applying herbicides to control weeds. That's ridiculous. If you don't have any weeds, why waste the money? If you go out there and mow your lawn regularly, which is an active method of controlling weeds, then you will never know that you have weeds. So especially if you cut your lawn, drive around after you do it, and drive past your house like it's not even yours, guess what? You'll never even notice the weeds for the most part. So a lot of times we spend too much time micromanaging our lawns. Just make sure that you read labels of products. This is one of those e-gas moments that somebody goes out and does a whole bunch of spraying and didn't realize that they picked up the wrong container. So don't, label your containers. Make sure you know what products you're putting out, especially like this great little Facebook deal in my neighborhood. Guy put out this fertilizer that was supposed to be a turf builder, fall weed and feed. Well, it killed his whole lawn. Why? Because he didn't have Bermuda. He had St. Augustine. This bag is for Bermuda. So you've got to read labels. Post-emergent control, a lot of times we can get away with just tearing them out by hand. Be careful for these types of guys that are out there. They want you to hurry up, apply it now, do it right now. Now's the time. It's never too late to do the right thing. Yeah, especially when some of these, the soil temperatures are way past what they need to be. And so these weeds have already germinated. So why put out a pre-emergent now? It's way too late to do something like this. A lot of these places you have to think, what are they trying to sell me? Okay, what product are they trying to push on me? A lot of times, if you just know that, then you'll save some money and you'll do things at the appropriate time. So pre-emergent herbicides tend to be, and I tell our people here in Montgomery County, some of the late January, early February. That helps. That is a good start for us. Sometimes, because of our roller coaster ride as far as temperatures, a second application or a split application works out to kind of help level the playing field, but a good application then, and then also, a good pre-emergent, somewhere around that September time frame will also help get those winter weeds. A lot of the winter weeds we have right now are like annual bluegrass, poa annua, chickweeds, henbits. All these weeds are going to be going away. All the clovers, they're all going to be going away. Hopefully you've been mowing these too. The biggest thing is, especially we have grassy weeds, try to mow them before they get seed heads, or you can pick the seed heads off so they don't distribute their seeds everywhere. But all these are fixed to be going away just because it's getting to get warm. A lot of times people will start to try to use these too late in the season. These are a lot of the broadleaf weed control products that are out there. They're either ready to use or concentrated formulations. You have to be very careful because a lot of these say do not apply above 85 degrees. That's when you start getting into problems where it starts to burn the lawn. So we don't want to do things like that. But like I said, if you have weed problems, the best thing to do is get those weeds identified. Your extension agents and your master gardener programs, they will help you identify the weeds, and they can get you a little bit more honed in on products that might control them as far as post-emerge products, or at least get you on some type of lawn schedule to help you control them in the future. One of the other things we see a lot of kind of ramp up this time of year is take all root rot. We start to get that, we'll start to get that green up, and probably about end of May, into May, we may start to see some yellow spots out there. You need to get those kind of checked out and make sure so you know what it is. If you've had take all root rot or take all patch, if you've had it in the past, it's, you kind of need to be looking for it, trying to get ahead of it. You get these big old bare spots all of a sudden, you have dead runners, no grass. This is kind of what you're left with. You can see that St. Augustine right there. It's real, it almost looks like a dwarf. It's just real pygmy looking. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look healthy. That's because of that fungus that takes over. That fungus hits the root systems. It hits the runners as well, the stolons. And once it gets into that area, it basically restricts the movement of water and nutrients. So it kind of chokes that St. Augustine. So you have to be careful about take all root rot. This is what it looks like under a microscope. You can kind of see up at the top right, kind of where that elbow is. You can kind of see some hairy-like structure up there. That's, the beginning stages of it when it starts to grow. This typically starts here in April. This is when it starts to grow. And then we start seeing symptoms in May, June, July, just depending on the severity or at least, the severity of the take all root rot fungus. So that's what it looks like up close. This is a heavy infestation, lots of dead grass. Found a lot of good examples of what it looks like under a microscope. Fungicides, as long as you're using, anything, fungicides are best as a preventative, not as a curative. Okay, so they don't cure it. They can prevent it, or at least slow it down to give your grass a chance to sustain itself, or at least grow. But the fact is, it'll take, most of the other grasses as well. A lot of people come in and just rip it out and put in some new St. Augustine. Well, as long as that St. Augustine stays healthy, then you won't have the issues with it regrowing, or at least coming back. So it has to stay healthy. When it's stressed out, it's more susceptible. So overwatering, over-fertilization, those types of things. And just remember, whenever you're putting in a new lawn, I always recommend that you don't fertilize or do anything for at least 1 year. Just because, you've got tender root systems, and, there's typically enough nutrient and everything there already in the soil that you're putting down with the sod that'll help get it through. But at least give it 1 year so you don't damage it. So there's some examples of some good fungicides to use as far as preventatives. Peat moss, there's a sphagnum peat moss treatment that's like 1/8 of an inch treatment. So 1/8 of an inch. It's just a light dusting. That is a good way to kind of knock it back a little bit. I have, for Montgomery County, I have some kind of patterns that I've been seeing and getting people to do different kind of applications to see what works really well. We've got, some where we do 3 applications a year, starting, this time of year to kind of knock it back in the beginning, one time in about July and the other time about August, September. Some of these have worked quite well. Now, keep in mind, with take all root rot, take all patch, there are actually 2 strains of the Rhizoctonia. There's one of the strains is a Florida strain. It is very quick acting. It moves, all the symptoms are very quick to go through. The second one is a slower acting one, and typically you can have both in your lawn. So there's 2 different strains of take all. Best thing you can ever do is take good notes. For example, if you have a certain weed that you got identified, what you use to treat it. One of the things that needs to happen when you do use fungicides or insecticides, pesticides, whatever it is, any kind of pesticide, make sure you're rotating your chemicals. That one weed earlier that I talked about, Poa annua, that's one that is actually causing people a lot of heartache right now because they're resistant to some of the pre-emergents out there, because especially in the golf courses, because they use the same product year in, year out. So now they've become resistant. Same thing with the post-emerge products when you spray it on top. So when they become resistant, that's a problem. So rotate your chemicals, yearly. Maybe have 2 different types of chemicals you just go back and forth to. That way you don't build up resistance, especially with fungal issues and insects as well. So just take good notes. That's the best thing I could advise you. If you have any resources that you'd like to look at, definitely look at that aggiturf.tamu.edu. We got some great publications on that website. Definitely utilize the soil testing. and utilize your county extension agents in your area. So, wow, man, I got through that in 1 hour exactly. You have any questions? Brian Ewing. All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Hopefully it's good information to kind of help you hone in on your lawns, because a lot of people get green envy this time of year. Any questions? Feel free to type them in the chat. Ragweed, as far as, is this pasture or home lawn? If you have, ragweed, home lawn. Whoa, home lawn. Let me guess, you're next to a pasture. Probably. So, we don't get too many ragweed control issues in lawns. Let me look here. And most of the time, one of the things, of course, mowing height, if you keep it mowed, it'll eventually kind of eradicate it, because it doesn't allow it to reseed and be a problem. If you have, just pockets of ragweed here and there, probably just using a kill all type product like glyphosate or something like that, just as a spot spray to kill the individual weeds, is probably going to be your best bet. And of course, physical removal, since they're a larger weed, it's going to be much easier to use them, especially right after a rain or something like that. Just physical removal will be the best way. And then just go back and, look at that time frame about, when to put out your pre-emergent. And if you put out your pre-emergent in the right time, you'll be able to kind of manage them better. There's never full 100% control. It's more of management of those weeds. So just like a little kill all, but just spray it, or just put it right on the weed that you're targeting itself, which would be that ragweed. Unless anybody else, my guys here, have any other suggestions on that one? Nope. Yep. Nope. Yep. Nope. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right, folks. Well, got maybe one other question here. See, Larry has his hand raised. You have a question, Larry, or Larry L?
Great job, Mike.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Nope, sorry. Okay, no problem. All right, folks. That concludes for today. If you, like I say, utilize your county extension agents in your local area to help you with some of the timing issues as far as application of your pre-emergent products and your post-emerge products. Just remember that those are totally different times of the year, and shouldn't be combined into one application like a weed and feed. So we need to eliminate that stuff. So thank you, folks. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time at our next announced program.